Racist teacher forces black boy to play piano to humiliate him, but his talent leaves her in shock. Elijah Rivers is a sixth grade student at Jefferson High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, a boy with a petite stature, deep-set eyes, and an unremarkable appearance. He lives in a separate world where the sounds of piano music are his greatest passion, but he has never dared to let anyone see it. Unlike the other children his age, Elijah always chose to be quiet, avoid attention, and find ways to blend into the shadows of the crowd. In class, he is a shy, quiet child, like a ghost that no one pays attention to. The relationship between Elijah and Miss Abigail Thornton is rarely mentioned, but it is a crucial factor in his silence. Miss Thornton, a strict and demanding teacher, always underestimated students like Elijah. Unlike other teachers, she never gives him any encouragement. Instead, she always looked at Elijah as an ordinary student, nothing special, and this only made him more self-conscious. Every time she entered the classroom, her cold gaze made Elijah feel scrutinized, making his world narrower and lonelier than ever. However, within Elijah lies a hidden strength that no one recognizes. His talent for playing the piano, a priceless gift from his grandfather, a brilliant jazz musician, helped him find a personal space where he truly felt free and confident. Every time Elijah's fingers glide over the keys, he feels as if he escapes all constraints, all judgments, and immerses himself in the music, the only place where he truly feels he exists. But that was something he had never dared to share with anyone. Miss Thornton always made Elijah feel like an invisible person in class. Even if he tried to raise his hand, no matter how correct his answer was, she never called on him. Every time the other children received praise or encouragement from her, Elijah would quietly sit there, his hands clenched on the desk, trying not to show his disappointment. Even when he answered correctly, she simply nodded coldly, as if it were a matter of course, not worth paying attention to. No praise, no encouragement whatsoever for him. Each time like that, a part of Elijah felt like it was being drained. He began to believe that what he did was never good enough, that he never deserved attention or recognition. This feeling gradually accumulated, forming an ever-growing sense of inferiority in Elijah's mind. Miss Thornton's cold glances were not just invisible criticisms, but also indirect denials of his creativity and abilities. He doesn't dare to believe in himself, doesn't dare to reveal his true talent, because he fears being overlooked again, being rejected like before. He is becoming more and more withdrawn, building a solid wall around his emotions, not wanting anyone to know his deep thoughts or dreams. However, during the long, endless hours of studying, music has always been an indispensable part of Elijah's life. Even though Miss Thornton never realized it, he still found solace in every note. And although he had never dared to share his musical talent, every time his fingers touched the piano keys, he felt something very different, a sense of freedom he had never experienced in her classroom. But those are just rare and private moments that he keeps to himself. One morning, as the gentle light of dawn streamed through the classroom window, Miss Thornton began her lecture on Sherman's campaign in the American Civil War. The whole class sat quietly, listening attentively, while Elijah continued his habit of keeping his head down, not wanting to attract attention. But that day, something unexpected happened. Miss Thornton, after explaining for a while, suddenly turned to Elijah and asked him to answer a question. Without any prior warning, and without any indication that she would choose him, the whole class fell silent, their gazes turning towards Elijah, who always avoided attention. However, instead of being scared like before, this time Elijah felt a surprising surge of confidence rising within him. He had read the material thoroughly, and Miss Thornton's question didn't stump him. He took a deep breath, then spoke up to answer. The words flowed out fluently and accurately, as if he had practiced for a long time. Elijah's answer was not only correct, but also complete and profound, leaving the whole class astonished. A silence enveloped the room, and then the surprised gazes of the classmates suddenly stopped at him. They couldn't believe what they had just heard. Miss Thornton, although her expression did not change, there was something incomprehensible in her eyes. She didn't say anything immediately, but the suspicion was clear in her attitude. Miss Thornton was not someone who was easily impressed. In fact, she always doubted Elijah's abilities and never thought he could have a deep understanding of any subject. But today, something within her made it impossible for her to ignore. She looked at him sharply, then slowly spoke. Interesting. But could you answer another question related to a more difficult aspect of this campaign? Thornton seemed unable to believe what had just happened, and that awakened another part of her. She wanted to challenge him, not only to verify whether this was a coincidence or not, but perhaps also to assert that she could control every situation in her classroom. A few days later, during music class, Miss Thornton, with her cold expression and sharp eyes, unexpectedly asked Elijah to play the piano in front of the whole class. She knew that he never revealed his musical talent, and she thought that if he had to face the expectant gazes of his classmates, he wouldn't be able to perform well. She hopes that moment will be an opportunity for her to prove that the doubts about Elijah's abilities are not unfounded. An embarrassing moment when he can't play the right notes will further diminish his value in the eyes of his classmates, and above all, will reinforce her belief that Elijah is just an ordinary student, nothing special. But what Miss Thornton didn't know was that for Elijah, this was not just a challenge of playing ability. This is a much greater challenge, a confrontation with his own self esteem and resilience. For a long time, he had always hidden his talent, not wanting anyone to see his true emotions inside. Every time he sat in front of the piano, he felt like he was stepping into another world, where he could freely express himself without fear of judgment. However, when Miss Thornton asked him to play in front of the class, the walls he had built over the years seemed about to crumble. The eyes of his classmates, of the teacher, all turned towards him. At this moment, not only is the music being tested, but also your confidence and courage. You can't refuse. You know that if you don't do this, there won't be another chance. But it was also in that moment that Elijah realized this challenge was not just to prove something to Miss Thornton or his classmates. It was an opportunity for him to prove to himself that he could overcome fear, that he could be stronger than he had ever imagined. The piano, once a place where you found freedom, has now become a symbol of the inner battle you must face. You used to play quietly and discreetly, but now you are forced to share your music with the whole world. Elijah felt a strong wave of anxiety rise in his chest when Miss Thornton asked him to play the piano in front of the class. Every nerve in his body was taut, as if an invisible pressure was weighing down on each of his steps. But then a thought crossed Elijah's mind. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, an opportunity not only to affirm his musical ability, but also to prove his worth in front of the skeptical gazes, the coldness of Miss Thornton, and the silence of his classmates. He knew that if he didn't seize this opportunity, he would forever remain a shadow in the classroom, someone who never dared to rise up. Determination had taken root in Elijah's heart. He began to dedicate every evening to practice, his small hands tirelessly gliding over the piano keys, while the words of Miss Thornton and the cold stares of his classmates still echoed in his mind. He didn't just play the piano to showcase his talent, but also to prove that he wasn't an ordinary student, that he wasn't a person without value. He wanted to show the teacher and his classmates that everyone has a story, a talent, even if it might be hidden in the shadows of doubt. Every night, as your fingers touch each piano key, a part of you is also beginning to change. He realized that it wasn't just music that made him feel free, but that while he was playing the piano, he was also learning to love himself more. The gentle melodies echoed in the dark room, each note a step forward, a small but persistent stride. He is not only practicing to overcome Miss Thornton's doubts, but also to overcome the doubts within himself. You understand that perseverance is not just about playing the piano well, but also about learning to accept yourself, no matter how different or flawed you may be. With each evening of practice, Elijah gradually felt a new source of strength welling up within him. He began to believe that he could face any challenge, not just in music, but in life as well. You know that no matter what, this is the time for you to step out of the shadows and assert yourself. And on the day when he has to face the class, Miss Thornton and his classmates, Elijah will not just play the piano, he will play to express himself, to prove that no matter what, he deserves to be heard. The day of the confrontation has finally arrived, and Elijah feels a tense atmosphere enveloping the classroom. Each step he took seemed heavier. Every sound, every gesture became too loud compared to the surrounding silence. His classmates looked at him with a mix of suspicion and curiosity, as if they were waiting for a mistake, a misstep to prove that what he had shown before was just a coincidence. As for Miss Thornton, sitting in her seat, her gaze was sharp and seemed unable to hide her anticipation. She did not look at him with expectation, but with a desire for failure as a way to assert that he was not worthy of attention. However, deep down in Elijah's heart, that tension could not weaken his determination. He took a deep breath, then stepped closer to the piano, feeling his hands slightly trembling yet steady. He looked at the piano keys, then looked up, seeing all the eyes in the class focused on him. A feeling of anxiety surged up, but he also felt the strength rising within him. The hours of hard training have come time to be showcased. You can't let yourself fail. Each finger will glide over the piano keys with all the determination and perseverance you have cultivated over the years. At this moment, Elijah is no longer just a shy student, no longer the boy who always avoided attention. He is a true musician, even if no one recognizes it yet. Despite being anxious and tense, he was determined not just to play a piece of music. He would play to prove himself, to conquer the doubts within and around him. He lowered his body, gently placed his hands on the piano keys, and the first notes rang out, shattering the silence, carrying with them the self-confidence he had just rediscovered. When Elijah began the first notes of the jazz piece his uncle had taught him, everything in the classroom seemed to stop. The first gentle sound emanated from the piano, but immediately it drew everyone into another realm where only music and emotions existed. His fingers glided over the piano keys with a gentle yet technical touch, each note seeming to tell a unique story. Elijah's story, a tale of perseverance, of the hidden pains and joys behind the walls of self-doubt he had built over the years. The classroom fell into an absolute silence, as if no sound other than his playing could exist. The skeptical gazes, which had always underestimated him, now held no doubt. One by one, the people in the class began to listen, not just because he was the one playing, but because they could not deny the talent and charm in every melody he created. You are not just playing music. You are expressing a part of your soul, a part of the confidence you have just rediscovered. Each note is like a declaration. I am valuable, and I am not afraid to prove it. The emotion in Elijah's music is something that cannot be faked. He is no longer just a shy student in the classroom, but a true artist, expressing pride in himself through every key he plays. His fingers not only glided over the keys, but also seemed to want to erase all the prejudices and doubts that had been sown over time. You proved that no one can underestimate you. No one can diminish your value with superficial glances or hasty judgments. As the music gradually reached its conclusion, the atmosphere in the classroom was no longer tense, but filled with admiration. He stopped playing, but the silence lingered, as if everyone was overwhelmed by what had just happened. Elijah slowly withdrew his hand from the piano keys, and only then did the classroom truly erupt in thunderous applause. No one said anything, but everyone understood that he had done what no one thought was possible. And that was the moment Elijah knew that, regardless of what Miss Thornton or anyone else in the class thought, he had proven that he deserved to be heard. After the performance ended, the classroom erupted in thunderous applause. The entire space seemed to light up. The applause continued without pause, as if no one could contain their admiration for the talent Elijah had just displayed. He didn't need the compliments, but the feeling of respect rising from everyone around made his heart warm. This is the first time he clearly feels the change in how the class perceives him. The doubtful glances and previous hesitance have now disappeared, replaced by impressive looks, even a hint of admiration. You are no longer the one who is forgotten. That feeling is truly strange, but also incredibly precious. You no longer have to hide in the shadows of insecurity or anxiety. The class now sees you not just as a shy, quiet student, but as a valuable, capable person, and above all, someone with their own story. Although you never wished to be the center of attention, at this moment, that attention no longer makes you feel pressured. Instead, he feels a sense of pride in himself, in what he has dared to do and dared to express. When he looked up, The gazes of his classmates no longer held scrutiny or distance. Some people smiled at him, and the applause didn't stop until Miss Thornton, who had always doubted him, couldn't hide her admiration anymore. She looked at Elijah with a different gaze, no longer filled with doubt, but rather an unspoken acknowledgement of the talent he had displayed. At that moment, Elijah knew that he had changed, not only in the eyes of Miss Thornton and his classmates, but also in the way he perceived himself. He was no longer the scared boy standing behind the walls of self-doubt, but a person who dared to step into the light, daring to share his talents and story with the world. And although this was not easy, he knew that he had won, not just a competition, but a crucial part in the journey of rediscovering himself. After class, Elijah could no longer suppress the emotions within him. He felt a fire igniting within him, a compulsion to confront Miss Thornton, the one who had always looked down on him, the one he believed had never recognized his true worth. You walked up to the teacher's desk where Miss Thornton was packing up her documents, your gaze full of determination. When he stood facing her, a silence enveloped the room. At this moment, all the previous worries seemed to have vanished. He looked at her and said decisively, "Miss Thornton, I want to ask you something. Why do you always underestimate me? Why have you never given me a chance? I have proven my abilities, but you have never acknowledged them, have you? I just want you to reconsider how you evaluate me and the other students." The question hung in the air, heavy and resolute. He felt as if the entire classroom had vanished, leaving only him and Miss Thornton and his own story that she had never heard. For a few seconds, Miss Thornton said nothing, just looked at him with the cold gaze he was familiar with. But unlike the previous times, that gaze no longer held contempt, but rather a silence full of contemplation. Miss Thornton stood there, not rushing to respond, as if she were trying to find the right words to answer. Each passing second seemed to stretch the tension, but her gaze had changed. No longer was there coldness or suspicion. Instead, there was a different look, perhaps admiration. She didn't speak immediately, but her eyes began to show recognition, as if she were realizing that perhaps she had been wrong, or at least had overlooked something important. Finally, Miss Thornton spoke up, her tone no longer as sharp as before. "Elijah, I don't know what to say. I misjudged you, and I apologize for not recognizing your abilities." Her apology, though brief, carried a great weight. That was the first time Miss Thornton expressed acknowledgement and respect towards him. Elijah stood there, in silence, feeling a strange sense of relief. He didn't need an apology, but the change in Miss Thornton's attitude brought him a sweet sense of victory. You are no longer the weak, underestimated boy in the classroom. Now you are someone who can stand firm, face everything, and change it all. Although Miss Thornton still maintained her usual stern demeanor, Elijah could sense a small but clear change in her gaze when she faced him. That gaze was no longer cold and full of suspicion, but instead held a deep admiration. Even without saying it out loud, her eyes seemed to convey something new, a different perspective on him, not as before, but a recognition of the talent and resilience he had shown. Miss Thornton still maintained her serious demeanor, not a hint of softness, but Elijah knew that she had changed her perception of him. You don't need her to admit it in words, because her eyes have said it all. The respect she has for you is not a loud compliment or excessive praise, but a silence full of understanding, a perspective you have never received before. Elijah couldn't help but feel a gentle warmth spreading in his heart. This feeling is not like the applause of friends or the compliments from teachers, but something deeper. It is acceptance, being recognized properly after a long time of being misjudged. He didn't need Miss Thornton to say the words of affirmation, because in that moment, he realized that he had proven his worth. And even though she didn't admit it directly, Elijah felt the respect she had for him, a respect not easily given, but the result of the efforts and changes he had made. After that event, the attitude of the classmates towards Elijah completely changed. The mockery and unfriendly glances that used to be directed at him were no longer there. Instead, they began to look at him with respect, as if they had just realized a part of the value he had been hiding all along. You are no longer the forgotten one in the classroom, but a valuable individual, talented and deserving of recognition. The glances now are no longer scrutinizing or judging, but rather admiring looks, and sometimes a bit of surprise. You, the one whom few paid attention to before, have now become an indispensable part of the class's student community. When he got home, his heart still full of emotions after the performance, Elijah couldn't help but tell his mother about it. His mother sat beside him, her eyes filled with pride and happiness as she listened to her son share about what he had experienced. The words of encouragement from his mother, though simple, were full of strength, like a cool stream soothing his worries. "You did very well, Elijah. I always knew you could do this," his mother said, her eyes lighting up with joy and undeniable trust. Mother's words seemed to give Elijah strength. He realized that the encouragement and love from his family were not just words of comfort, but a powerful source of motivation that helped him continue to walk steadily on his own path. Mom is not only the one who always supports you in every decision, but also the first person to help you realize your own worth. The feeling of being loved and trusted is something he has never felt so deeply before, and that is the strongest motivation for Elijah to keep striving and never give up. The story of Elijah Rivers conveys the message that one should not let others underestimate their abilities. True talent will always shine, and no one can judge you through their prejudices. Sometimes the greatest challenges in life are not the lessons from books, but the moments when we stand up and affirm our own worth.